Hello, and welcome back to English for Philosophy students. I have to apologize today. My voice may be very soft or scratchy because I am starting a cold. And maybe I won't have the pep that I usually have. But we will get through a lot of the book. Okay, we had a couple of questions this week. The first question I will take a long time to answer. You might want to get a pencil and paper and take notes if you are interested. The question was, can we recommend to you some movies that will explain American history or that will portray periods of American history faithfully so that you can get a feel for American cultural history. So, I thought about it myself, and I also researched on the internet, and I asked my friends here for suggestions, and I have a number of suggestions. So you can write them down if you want. The first suggestion is not a movie. It's a TV series called, I think it's called John Adams. Is that right? It's called John Adams. John Adams was one of the great men at the time of the American Revolution. He was one of the key figures who pushed the idea of American independence through the Continental Congress. So here is a TV series on his life. Some of these movies I have seen, and some I have not seen, but I have a little bit of information about each one. So, another movie about the same time period as John Adams is The Patriot. This is a recent movie. It is sort of violent, but it is a good picture of life at the time of the American Revolution. Let's see. Okay. These movies are sort of loosely arranged in the chronological order. Not perfect, though. Here's one called The Last of the Mohicans. This is a movie based on a famous book. It is dealing with the French and Indian War, which was in the colonial period before the Revolution. So this is a little bit earlier than these two, but roughly the same time. Okay. Hold on. 19th century, 1800s. Okay, another period of time we have a movie called The Crucible. Which is based on a play by Arthur Miller. The Crucible is about a time in the 1700s, 18th century, when there was a fear of witches. In Salem, Massachusetts. And this is a very famous time in American history. It captures the American imagination. Salem was a small village. I believe it had only a few hundred people. And there was a scare about witches, and people were being accused of witchcraft. And they actually hung maybe 20 or so, 19 or 20 citizens, including old women and people who were well respected. So for a village of a few hundred to hang 20 people was a huge thing. However, the Crucible is only about the Salem witch trials on the surface. Actually, Arthur Miller meant to write a satire of the fear of communism. In the 1950s. We had a senator by the name of Joe McCarthy, who was accusing people of being communist in the same way that some children were accusing people of being witches in Salem. So the Crucible is good history of the Salem witch trials, but it is also a satire of the communist scare of the 1950s. So that's an interesting movie. A movie that came to my mind immediately when I read the question is Gone with the Wind. This is a very famous movie in the United States. It is about life before the Civil War and during and immediately after the Civil War in the South. This will show what Southern life was like in the Old South before the Civil War, when they had slavery, black slavery, and then the hardship of the war between the states, and then the challenges of the period of Reconstruction. One linguistic note, the actors speak with a strong Southern accent. So it may be a little difficult to understand for non-native speakers, but it would be good for you to get used to it because people still have that accent in the South today. So, Gone with the Wind. That's a good one. Let's see. Here's one called Grapes of Wrath. This also is based on a famous novel. And remember, novel means a work of fiction, a book. It is about a period of time we call the Great Depression. In the 1930s. By the way, Gone with the Wind is 1865 to maybe 70. This Grapes of Wrath is in the Great Depression. There was a situation we call the Dust Bowl. What happened was there were great plains of grassland in the middle portion of the North American continent. And farmers extended out and farmed that land. And then a series of droughts and dry years came, and all of the grass and all of the crops dried up, and the soil turned to dust, and was picked up in dust storms. So farms became buried in dust. It was terrible, and you can see that in the movie, The Grapes of Wrath. The poverty was incredible. So, one disclaimer. According to one person who I spoke to, this movie is very left-wing. So, I haven't seen it myself. Let's see, Grapes of Wrath. Okay, here's one about World War II in the 1940s in the United States. The name of the movie is Patton. Patton, this is a famous classic movie in the United States. George Patton was a general in the armed forces of the United States during World War II, 1940s. And this movie shows life in America and also some scenes from the European war effort of where the Americans were serving. Okay, here's one. It's called The Right Stuff. This movie is about what we call the Cold War. But actually, it's more about, okay, let me tell you. The Cold War is a term, a phrase we use to refer to the period of time from World War II till about the 1990s, when the United States and the Soviet Union were the two great world powers with nuclear capability. And there was a fear that if either of these two ever became out of balance and launched a first strike attack with nuclear weapons, it would destroy the world. So instead of having a hot war where you fight and shoot and explode bombs, it was a cold war. It was undeclared. We sent spies to them, they sent spies to us, and we tried to compete in nonviolent ways. And one of those nonviolent ways was the space race. Space race. And I believe this movie deals with the launching of Sputnik. Sputnik was the Russian rocket that went into space, and they won the space race. They got ahead of the United States, and this caused the United States to respond by pouring money and resources into our space program, culminating in sending a man to the moon in the early 1960s. So, The Right Stuff is about the 1950s. Which is a very interesting time in American history. Here's an interesting piece. Woodstock. Oh, sorry. Woodstock, 1970. The movie itself was made in 1970. But the event, Woodstock, was a 3-day music festival. 3-day music festival. And it wasn't in 1970. I don't want to write that down. It was in the 60s. It was in 1969. And it holds a significance for Americans because it was a time when there was a cultural revolution in America in the 1960s. And you had hippies, you had drugs, you had free love, and you had peace, as in anti-Vietnam War. And so Woodstock was a 3-day party where all of these values were expressed. So it's a picture of the 1960s. Very, very formative time. And if you see this, think to yourself, the people who were there at Woodstock are in their 50s now and are running the country. Bill Clinton was probably at Woodstock. These people were teenagers at Woodstock are the powerful men today. So this was the youth of the America of today. It's kind of an important aspect of American history. All right. I don't think we'll go with that one. All right, one last one. Oh, actually, there are a couple more. And then we'll get to the book. One is called All the President's Men. All the President's Men. This is about a period of American history that I remember. It was what we call the Watergate scandal. President Nixon. President Nixon was in office, and some of his men put illegal recording devices into offices of the Democratic Party, the opposition party. And they were discovered, and it was considered, it was illegal to do that. And President Nixon lied about his involvement, which led to his impeachment. Previous to this, America had the idea that her leaders were men of high character. We admired our leaders, and the media did not report bad things about the presidents. But in this scandal, what came to light were some tapes, audio tapes. Audio tapes of President Nixon doing business. And the tapes showed him to be a man who used profanity, bad words, bad values, bad morals. The tapes revealed him to be a bad person, and America was shocked. It was really this that was the big killer, not the illegal activities. So it's had a huge impact on American public life. So, I'll give you one more movie. This is kind of a funny movie, and it's not serious history, but it goes through and shows vignettes of many American historical situations. Forrest Gump. Have any of you seen Forrest Gump? Yeah, they have. Forrest Gump is a mentally slow, kind of a stupid person. Very stupid. And in this movie, it's a comedy, he lives through all of the key events of 20th century history. Everything I've shown you in these movies, he lived through. And he was totally stupid, but he made an impact. He impacted the society. And it is fiction. There was never any Forrest Gump. It's just funny. But it shows many different, like he's there at Watergate, and he's there in Vietnam, and he's there for the Cold War and the launching of Sputnik. He's everywhere. So it's a fun movie. He does have kind of a funny accent, though, so it might be hard to understand him, too. So, okay. We had one more question, which leads us right into our study of the book. So I'll answer that question as we begin our book. So let me get my book. We'll be on page 24. Okay, the question was, what is the meaning of the phrase, so far as the English school is concerned? Okay, this phrase is found, let's see, on page 23 in the beginning of the second paragraph. The Cambridge that made such attempts to preserve and develop the heritage possible. The Cambridge that made these attempts possible has vanished into the past, into oblivion, so far as the English school is concerned. Now, what this means is, the main sentence is saying two things. The Cambridge meaning the ethos, the academic environment which fostered good literary scholarship, that Cambridge has vanished into the past for most people. For most people, this Cambridge has simply vanished into the past. It has become a matter of history, something we can understand and read about and remember, but we cannot see it today. But it is clear it exists in the past for most people. But as far as the English school is concerned, it has vanished into oblivion. Okay, into oblivion is not just into the past, because the past we can read about, we can remember it, we can see it clearly through books, through pictures, through memory, etc. That's the past. Oblivion knocks it out completely. Oblivion puts a fog so that you cannot see it, you cannot remember it. It's gone. It never happened. So, for most people, this Cambridge has vanished into the past. But as far as the English school is concerned, it has passed into oblivion. So, as far as the English school is concerned means simply for the English school. It has passed into oblivion. So, the Cambridge has vanished into the past for most people, but it has passed into oblivion for the English school. So that is what, as far as the English school is concerned, means. If that's not clear, let me know. You can email in the middle of class. We are on the chat room and on the email. Okay, now, this leads us directly into the idea we were talking about when we stopped last week. So, he just said the English school cannot even remember. It is into oblivion. It is into oblivion. The Cambridge, which valued good scholarship, has gone to oblivion in the English school. And then he says, am I exaggerating? Is that too much for me to say that the English school cannot even remember the Cambridge which fostered good scholarship? He says, is it possible that I am exaggerating? And then he says, no. He says, I am not exaggerating. And he brings a piece of proof to bear. He says that a prominent professor in the English school wrote a paper and passed it around to people. And in that paper, he said that we should get rid of practical criticism from the English tripos, because the paper on practical criticism, together with the concern for the kind of work it was designed to promote. I am now reading a quote from the very center of page 23. I will read the sentence beginning with, he insisted that the paper. Okay, it's in the very center of the paragraph. He insisted that the paper, together with the concern for the kind of work it was designed to promote, was out of date. So, we should get rid of the practical criticism because the paper itself and the work it is designed to promote are both out of date. Could I have a glass of water? Thank you very much. Okay, so he said that to test the students on practical criticism by making them write a paper for their English tripos, this paper and the work it is designed to promote. In other words, the whole portion of the course of study whereby they learn to read literature and comment on it. All of that is out of date. That means it is no longer relevant. It was good before, but now we don't need it anymore. That's what he said. Okay. Okay, now, at the bottom of that paragraph, I will read a sentence beginning with the words, but the significance. Page 23, toward the bottom. See, right there. But the significance immediately in point resides. The Don in question being a leading intellectual of Cambridge English. The significance resides in his notion of that past, which he judged to be irrelevant, and his account of the change that had robbed practical criticism of its reason for being. Okay, so the reading we are going to do today begins by talking about the significance of a leading, well-respected, high-up guy in the English school saying this. Saying that the paper and the work it is designed to promote is out of date. Okay? All right. Now, the last paragraph that we studied last week said, Levis began to discuss the guy's idea of the recent history. And Levis said that the guy said that Levis had invented practical criticism in response to James Joyce and T.S. Eliot and the enthusiasm for their work of the 1920s. Thank you very much. What the guy didn't realize was the practical criticism paper was already in the Tripos in 1917, before T.S. Eliot released The Wasteland, which was his big book. And I'm getting ahead of myself. So we need to get back. Let me just finish the paragraph we finished last week, then we'll launch into what I was about to say. Okay, so the guy said that Levis invented practical criticism in response to student taste of the 1920s. In fact, he said it as one who refers to something obvious, and yet it was factually incorrect. Okay, so let us begin with the paragraph, first full paragraph on page 24. This is where we left off last time. Actually, the need to cultivate the power of close and sensitive perception and response in the way that became known as practical criticism had received decisive recognition in the earliest days of the English Tripos, well before the publication of The Wasteland in 1922, when T.S. Eliot first became a contemporary value, though contempt prevailed for years in the academic world. Or the start of the at first clandestine cult of Ulysses. Work for the Tripos began in 1917, and I have, in the introduction to my published Clark lectures, put on record what university English owes to the fact that for the opening years the staff of the English school, there was no faculty, consisted of Mansfield D. Forbes, a man of intelligence, disinterestedness, and courage, such as institutional English at Cambridge has made itself safe against. The emphasis falls then not on the historical ignorance as such, but on the utter unawareness revealed by a leading intellectual of the English school of the nature of intelligent literary study, that is, of the nature of literature itself. Okay, let's start at the beginning of that paragraph. Remember, he just finished saying that this guy thinks Levis invented practical criticism in order to respond to the needs of the 1920s with T.S. Eliot and James Joyce. Okay. Actually, the need to cultivate the power of close and sensitive perception and response in the way that became known as practical criticism. Okay, read the need to cultivate. Cultivate is another word for promote. Cultivate and promote mean the same thing. Cultivate the power of close and sensitive perception and response. That is another way of saying practical criticism. It is descriptive. It describes what we are supposed to be doing. We are supposed to be cultivating the power of close and sensitive perception and response in the way that became known as practical criticism. Okay, this process had received decisive recognition in the earliest days of the English Tripos, well before the publication of The Wasteland. Okay, so if practical criticism was already recognized in the earliest days before T.S. Eliot came on the scene, then it is obvious that Levis didn't invent it in order to respond to T.S. Eliot. Practical criticism predated, came before T.S. Eliot and The Wasteland. So it is impossible that Levis could have invented it to respond. And this English guy should have known that. So that's the first thing. Okay, so well before the publication of The Wasteland in 1922, when Eliot first became a contemporary value. Okay, when it says Eliot became a contemporary value, contemporary implies modern, in time, recent, and it involves general, a household word, something that the common man valued. So, in the 1920s, T.S. Eliot became recognized as a great writer by many, many people, the masses. he became a contemporary value. Although, parentheses, contempt for T.S. Eliot prevailed for years in the academic world. That is sort of an insult. They're saying, Levis is saying, these ivory tower fogies don't know a good thing when they see it, even though everyone can recognize it. For years, the critics ignored T.S. Eliot while the world followed him. Finally, the academic experts decided he was okay. Or the start of the, at first, clandestine cult of Ulysses. Okay, we have to find where in the sentence that fits. Let us look at the beginning of the sentence. This is a really long sentence. Actually, the need to cultivate the power of close and sensitive perception and response in the way that became known as practical criticism had received decisive recognition in the earliest days of the English Tripos, well before the publication of The Waste Land, when Eliot became a contemporary value, or the start of the cult of Ulysses. So, the publication of The Waste Land and the cult of Ulysses both came at the same time, and practical criticism was already recognized. So practical criticism predated, came before the publication of The Waste Land and the development of the cult of Ulysses, the at first clandestine cult. Clandestine means secret. People were behind closed doors reading and discussing and becoming excited about Ulysses. When there is a cult of something, it means a whole culture arises around it. Groups form and they just develop a whole following. So apparently Ulysses was by James Joyce, was that kind of a book. So, going on to the next sentence. Okay, let me make sure, we've had some questions here about some vocabulary. Let me make sure all of the vocabulary is clear. One unclear vocabulary word might be contempt. The phrase is, it's in parentheses, though contempt prevailed, excuse me, for years in the academic world. Contempt means, it sort of means disrespect, but it is much stronger than disrespect. Extreme disrespect. Almost loathing. If you have contempt for someone, you might spit on them. Contempt means the most extreme disrespect. And in this context, it is making a contrast between the common man who really liked T.S. Eliot and the academics who had contempt for him because they were too good and he was too common. So contempt means disrespect. and it was on the part of the academic elite. To prevail. And the phrase is, oh, right, same phrase, though contempt prevailed. For years, right? Contempt prevailed for years in the academic world. It means it continued. It continued to exist, even though there were many reasons for it to go away. It persisted. So I guess it would mean to persist. And it sort of has a connotation of and triumphs over other ideas. To prevail would be to win the battle and to continue to exist, to persist. So contempt prevailed for years. All right, let's see. O2. Oh, yeah. Another phrase that has been questioned is owes to. All right, the sentence is, work for the Trippists began in 1917, and I have, in the introduction to my published Clark Lectures, put on record what University English owes to the fact that for the opening years, the staff of the English school consisted of Mansfield Forbes. If you owe somebody, you are in their debt. To be in debt to. Debt is pronounced D-E-T, but it's spelled D-E-B-T. So we pronounce it debt. Okay? To be in debt is to have borrowed money or received a favor. So if I am in trouble and I ask you, can you give me some money? I need money to pay my bill. And you give me money, I am in debt to you. I owe you something. Or if you help me in some way, and I want to thank you, and I want to serve you in turn, I am in debt to you. I want to give back what you have given. So, owes, if something is owing, it has that feel of something good has been given and you are in debt. So the English school owes something to the fact that they had this guy, Mansfield D. Forbes, who was a great guy. So when they say, I put on record, which means I wrote it down for all to see publicly, I put on record what University English owes to the fact that for the opening years, the staff consisted of Mansfield Forbes. It's saying that the English school received a great gift in this guy, Mansfield Forbes. Okay, so owes means they received a gift, and they are now correspondingly in debt. So it means something good happened, and they would be grateful. Okay, to make oneself safe against. We haven't even read that bit yet. So maybe I'll get that in context. Okay. All right. Let's go on, and I'll catch the rest of these words as we hit them. Okay, so where are we? Let's see. Okay, let us look at the sentence that begins with the words work for the Trippus. Work for the Trippus began in 1917, and I have, in the introduction to my published Clark Lectures, put on record what University English owes to the fact that for the opening years, the staff of the English school, there was no faculty, consisted of Mansfield D. Forbes, a man of intelligence, disinterestedness, and courage, such as institutional English at Cambridge has made itself safe against. Now, before we take this apart, I want to point out one fact that I believe is the key fact that Levis wants to get across with this sentence. The fact is, the only person on staff in 1917 was Mansfield D. Forbes. Levis wasn't even on staff. Therefore, he cannot be responsible for imposing practical criticism on the whole, on the English Trippus. I think that is his point, that the allegation, the suggestion that this is all Levis's fault, he invented practical criticism and then he imposed it on an unwilling body of students who didn't really need it, and then made it prevail and persist all the way into the modern day, was all false. And he wasn't even on staff at the time when it was already recognized. In fact, his point is this is a long tradition of literary scholarship, and the one who wants to get rid of it has the burden of proof to prove that it needs to go, because the status quo has been practical criticism all along. So I think that's what Levis is trying to say.
Margarita.
Yes.
One student asks what staff means.
Staff means the people who are employed by the university, people who are receiving a paycheck, people who are teachers, administrators, people who are in charge. You have, in a school, you have staff and students. And faculty is teachers. Staff is everybody else who is working there. And students pay money to go. Okay? So if Levis wasn't on the staff, he wasn't working for them at the time. Okay, so work for the Trippus began in 1917, and I have put on record what University English owes to the fact that for the opening years, the staff of the English school, there was no faculty, consisted of one man, Mansfield D. Forbes. And what kind of a man was he like? He was a man of intelligence, disinterestedness. Disinterestedness means he was not trying to get a certain agenda through. He was fair and open-minded and impartial. And courage. Everybody knows courage means to push through in spite of danger. Okay. So he was a man of intelligence, fair play, and courage, such as institutional English at Cambridge has made itself safe against. Now, to make itself safe against, institutional English at Cambridge has made itself safe against.
Okay, Margarita.
Yes?
Just before you go into that, there's a question about the difference between faculty and staff.
Faculty is professors. They are teaching and researching professors. The faculty have a higher position of respect. The staff may teach, they may instruct, but they are not full professors. And they also do other functions that are a little bit lower. So we speak of the faculty and staff as a team of people who bring us education in a school. The faculty is on top and the staff is more underneath, administratively. That's my best understanding. Okay? All right. A man such as Mansfield D. Forbes, of intelligence, disinterestedness, and courage. This is a man such as, that means a man like him. Such as means like this. A man like this. Institutional English at Cambridge has made itself safe against. Now, forget this, and this is an irony, okay? This is sarcastic. This is not literal. Let me tell you the literal meaning of to make oneself safe against something. If in my neighborhood I know there are many thieves who want to break into my house and steal my stuff, I will put locks on my door. I will put in an alarm system so that it will flash and make noise when someone breaks in. I'll get a dog, a vicious dog, who will bark. I will build a fence and maybe install floodlights so I can see from my house if someone is coming over the fence. I will make myself safe against the threat of a thief coming in and stealing my stuff. That is the literal meaning of to make one's self safe against something. When institutional English makes themselves safe against a man like Mansfield D. Forbes, they are preventing good people from coming in and staying and allowing only the cowardly, stupid, prejudiced, biased people. So this is an insult against institutional English at Cambridge. It is saying that institutional English at Cambridge has made its atmosphere such that a man like Forbes would be repelled. He would not want to be there. He would have to get away. They have made themselves safe against good, wise, intelligent people coming and taking an office and working there. So this is an insult against institutional English at Cambridge. And remember, the beginning of the paragraph said, the first line I read today said something to the effect that the Cambridge, which fostered good scholarship, has vanished into the past. That Cambridge was the one that had Mansfield D. Forbes as its only staff member. So a tremendous change came about in English at Cambridge to change the environment so much that a man like Forbes could never exist there anymore. And no man like him will ever be able to survive there. They are safe against excellent staff members. And Levis couldn't possibly have been the one who did the practical criticism thing because he wasn't even there at the time. All right. The emphasis falls, then, not on the historical ignorance as such, but on the utter unawareness revealed by a leading intellectual of the English school of the nature of intelligent literary study, that is, of the nature of literature itself. Okay, Levis was saying that it was shocking that this man would suggest that we need to get rid of practical criticism because the paper and the work it was designed to promote was out of date. He then went on to say that Levis invented practical criticism and imposed it on the population because of the work of T.S. Eliot and James Joyce, which seemed to require practical criticism because it was very dense and it required careful analysis. That was historically inaccurate. And Levis has just shown that it was historically inadequate. But, he says, the emphasis falls, or, if you want to put it a different way, emphasis means what is most important. If I am tapping a rhythm, I don't know if you can hear this. If I am tapping a rhythm, it might be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. The emphasis falls on the first beat. The most important thing is where the emphasis falls. Levis is saying that the emphasis is not on the fact that the guy doesn't even know the history, that practical criticism was already part of the Tripos in 1917 when Mansfield D. Forbes was the only person on staff. And Levis couldn't possibly be responsible, and that it wasn't in response to Eliot and Joyce because they didn't come about till the 20s. Okay, all that is history that the guy didn't know. However, so he's not a historian, right? The emphasis is not there. The emphasis is not on the historical ignorance as such, but on the utter unawareness revealed by a leading intellectual of the English school of the nature of intelligent literary study, that is, of the nature of literature itself. Utter unawareness. Okay, so the big thing, the important thing, the thing Levis wants to emphasize is this guy's utter unawareness of the nature of intelligent literary study. Of the nature of intelligent literary study. That is, of literature itself. Utter unawareness. Utter means extreme. We talk of going to the uttermost ends of the earth. It means the very most extreme part. So if he is unaware, that's bad. If he is utterly unaware, that means he is absolutely clueless. He has no awareness whatsoever. He knows nothing about the nature of intelligent literary study. The nature of intelligent literary study, according to Levis, is basically practical criticism. Practical criticism is the word, the phrase, which embodies all intelligent literary study. It's careful, close criticism of the text itself and ultimately bringing in intelligent knowledge of other works of literature that are relevant. So if the guy says we need to get rid of practical criticism because it's out of date and students don't need it and it annoys them, which all we read last week, that would be like a math teacher saying it's out of date to teach how to count. Students in the past learned how to count, but students today are more interested in quantum physics and imaginary numbers and calculus or, very advanced things, and they don't need to learn how to count. Counting isn't important. That's the idea. If a prominent mathematician, teacher of a prominent school of mathematics, said we don't need to know numbers for math, it would be the same kind of thing. For the guy, a prominent member of the English school at Cambridge, to say that we don't need practical criticism, the paper itself and the form of study it engenders are out of date, is to reveal a total, utter unawareness of the nature of intelligent literary study. And the guy who said it was the leading expert, recently promoted to the highest seat in English in Cambridge. And if you are unaware of the nature of intelligent literary study, you're unaware of literature itself. It's not possible that you can claim to know literature if you don't even understand that it must be studied. So, moving on to the next paragraph.
Margarita.
Yes.
Do you happen to know who the main antagonist of Levis was? Who was this?
Isa, when you get a chance, get it.
Who was this prominent member of faculty?
I don't know, and the book doesn't say.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, sorry. A question came through. Do we happen to know who this guy was? And the answer is we do not know. Levis didn't say who he was. Maybe in the day that it was published, people would have known. But right now, I don't know. He was careful not to use a name. He would have been sued probably for slander or something if he had used a name in the published work here. So no, I don't know. But I don't think it matters. The guy is representative of the academic establishment. He would not have been promoted to the top chair if his views were not exactly what the rest of them wanted. So he represents the educational establishment of the day in England, and I have to say, he represents most of what's happening in higher education in America right now. So you can put many names to this guy. But of course, I'm reading the next paragraph now. Second full paragraph on page 24. But of course, the fact of a revelation of that kind, made in such a way, is itself history. And it is for us usefully symbolic. Thank you. The academic in question has his representative significance, what he represents being Professor Plum's Death of the Past. The changes which have taken place since I coined the phrase judgment and analysis explain sufficiently my neglect to go on with the promised book, and why there can be no question of my doing so. The problem now facing one takes the form of a transmuted world, so essentially hostile that one has to be, in response to it, always fully conscious of the basic apprehensions that make one resolute in resisting, explicit and insistent about them, and, though unsanguine, unmistakably positive in the mode of one's resistance, the resistance one aims at fostering, where it can be fostered. A patent manifestation of major change is the immense, the monstrous industry of book manufacture addressed to the vast new student populace that has been created, irreversibly, it is to be feared, in so short a time. So far as English is concerned, by far the greater part of the annual smother of aids to study is the work of authors or compilers, university teachers themselves, who betray their blank ignorance of what the profitable study of literature is like, and their indifference to the real problems that face all literary students. Okay, let us remember for a moment what we were talking about right before I began to read the paragraph. We were talking about the fact that the guy who wrote this paper has no name. But it doesn't matter, because he represents the viewpoint which is common in the colleges of America and of Europe and probably many other places. So the guy is representative of an attitude which is prevalent. It's everywhere. It's common. So, first sentence of the next paragraph here. But of course, the fact of a revelation of that kind, made in such a way, is itself history. What revelation? Made in what way? I suspect that the revelation he's talking about is the revelation of utter ignorance, utter unawareness on the part of a major Cambridge intellectual of the nature of intelligent literary study. The very fact that such a man could openly publish such remarks, exposing himself to being seen as completely ignorant, that itself makes history. That is such a significant event. It proves the enormous change that has come about in a short time. The fact that this guy could even say these things and not be kicked out. That is history. That is historically significant. And it is for us usefully symbolic. In other words, it is useful to us to see what it represents, to see what it symbolizes. We must be wise. We must see what is happening for the fact, but we must look behind the fact and say, what does this mean in terms of the broad society? And even beyond that, what does this mean to us? What should we do about it? So it is useful for us to take note of the fact that this guy not only revealed himself to be ignorant of history and ignorant of the nature of literature, but also that he did so in a public way and was not censured, not criticized. That means everybody agreed with him. And if everybody agreed with him, what does that mean about the society? So, it is usefully symbolic for us. The academic in question, when you say the academic, that means the person. An academic is a person in academia, a scholar. So the academic in question means the scholar or the professor. Okay, so the academic in question has his representative significance. That means he represents a lot of other people just like him. And what he represents being Professor Plum's Death of the Past. I Googled Professor Plum and Death of the Past to see if I could figure out what he was talking about there. And apparently somebody by the name of Plum wrote a book in which he talked about the way people would use the past, a spin of the past, an interpretation, perhaps even a false interpretation of the past, to justify something that's happening in the present. So maybe an example of that might be the way in South Africa and some parts of the South, racially bigoted people interpreted the events of the Old Testament and the Bible and the curse of Canaan to justify enslaving black people. It was a false interpretation of history to justify something they wanted to do in their day. And in the same way, this professor is rewriting history to justify a style of study of literature that isn't good. Okay, he's saying that Levis invented practical criticism to respond to James Joyce or T.S. Eliot. And that for that reason we now can throw it out because we're not studying Joyce and Eliot. But the truth is, Levis didn't invent it. It came from antiquity. And it wasn't just for James and Eliot, it was for all literature. And you shouldn't throw it out. You need to continue using it. So, The guy represents Professor Plum's death of the past, which is using a spin of the past to justify the present. The changes that have taken place since I coined the phrase judgment and analysis. What does it mean to coin a phrase? English is a very flexible language. People are constantly making up new words. And when they make up the new word, in a few years, it gets into the dictionary. And the language is growing all the time. So when you coin a phrase, it just means you made up a new phrase. And it became useful to people and became commonly understood. So he coined the phrase judgment and analysis for practical criticism. He made it up to use instead of practical criticism for reasons that he's already stated. Okay, so the changes that have taken place since I coined the phrase judgment and analysis explain sufficiently my neglect to go on with the promised book, and why there can be no question of my doing so. When he says there can be no question of my doing so, it has nothing to do with question. It just means I will not do it under any circumstance. I'm finished. I'm through. It is out of the question. We say it is out of the question. When someone asks you to do something and you say no, and then they say, please do this, and you say no, and they argue with you and give you good reasons, and they say, I'll pay you money and I really want you, won't you please do it? And you say, it's out of the question. That means absolutely not, discussion over. It's a very strong way of saying no way. So when he says there can be no question of my doing so, that means I cannot write this book. The change in the academic ethos is so radical that there's just no way. He's saying that when he first coined the phrase judgment and analysis, he was right on the edge of the precipice where Cambridge English was about to fall off. They had a good scholarship up to a point, and he said, I will write a book on judgment and analysis. And then, the change happened. And now, no more point. Why write it? There's no more reason to write this book. It will not be accepted. It will not be published. It would not be purchased. It would not be used by the teachers. It's out of the question. Because I'm trying to think of an example. It would be like writing a book about how to light the world with kerosene, just as Thomas Edison was about to invent the light bulb. Well, 20 years later, the world is lit by electricity. We no longer need a book about how to make kerosene lamps brighter because they're out of date. So, all right, so where are we? Okay, so the changes explain why he doesn't write the book, and he will not write the book. The problem now facing one, takes the form of a transmuted world so essentially hostile that one has to be in one's response to it always fully conscious of the basic apprehensions that make one resolute in resisting. Let's just take it that far. This is another one of those very long sentences. Okay, so previously they needed a book on judgment and analysis, just yet another book to teach them how to do literary criticism. However, the problem now that faces one, totally different problem, takes the form of a transmuted world, a world that has totally changed into a place so essentially hostile. Essentially hostile. That means in its essence, in its constitution, inherently hostile. So instead of dealing with students who want to learn, you are now fighting enemies who want to kill you or get rid of you. The academic world is now essentially hostile. So much so that one has to be, in one's response to it, always fully conscious of the basic apprehensions that make one resolute in resisting. If you are a scientist, a researcher, a medical doctor who is studying sickness and germs, you must always be conscious of the fact that if you cut your finger and the germ gets in, if it is a germ of a lethal disease like AIDS or something very deadly, you will die. So, when you are dealing with sharp knives, you must never for a moment forget the deadly nature of what you are dealing with. You must be conscious at all times. In the same way, this world has become so essentially hostile that you must be conscious at all times of the basic apprehensions that make one resolute in resisting. Now, an apprehension is an impression on your mind. A basic apprehension is a basic concept, a basic idea, a basic observation. So, we have observed certain things about the culture which have made us see that it is hostile to our way of thinking. However, maybe it will turn a happy face. Maybe it will seem like a friend. Maybe it will seem welcoming. Maybe it will invite you to speak, invite you to write a paper, invite you to teach a class. And you think, these are my friends. And you go in and you give a lecture or you write a paper or you teach a class, and then they jump on you and rip apart everything you said, humiliate and embarrass you, discredit you, and kick you out. You forgot the basic apprehensions which led you to be resolute in resisting. So, we have seen certain things, and we will not forget, and we will not be drawn in to believing that they are not enemies. In fact, they are enemies, and we must keep it conscious all the time that we must be resolute in resisting. Resolute means our mind is made up, no waffling, no thinking, well, maybe, maybe they're okay. Maybe we can compromise. Maybe we can have an agreement, something like this. No, we must be resolute in resisting. Explicit and insistent about them. About what? About the apprehensions that we have observed. We must be able to say no. They published this, they said that, they teach this, they have you read that? These things show that they are hostile. And we can be explicit, we can point to explicit details, and we must be insistent, even when they say, no, there's nothing to what you say. We must be insistent about these apprehensions that we have observed. And, although unsanguine, we must be unmistakably positive in the mode of our resistance, okay? Unsanguine means unhopeful. We must not expect victory. We see that the trajectory is downward. We see that. We do not think we're going to do this. We are not going to turn the trajectory around. We are not sanguine enough to believe that. No, we are unsanguine. We know the culture is going down. We do not have hope or expectation that it's going to go up. We are unsanguine. Yet, we are positive in our mode of resistance. So, we do not have hope, but we have respect, we have joy, we have goodness, we have clear thinking, we have positive methods in our exposure of the truth. So, although we are unsanguine, yet we retain a positive mien, a positive face, a positive countenance, and a positive heart, as we hold to the good and resist the bad. Okay? So, unsanguine, unmistakably positive in the mode. Mode means manner, the way we resist, the mode of one's resistance. The resistance one aims at fostering. So we're trying to get other people to join us, other students, other people who have clear sight, and they can see how to find their way in this dark world, how to find God, how to find goodness, how to find a wholesome lifestyle in the midst of this crazy world of downward trajectory. Okay, so we try to foster a resistance against the cultural slide in others where it can be fostered. Period. Where it can be fostered. Okay, so let's read that whole sentence one last time. I'm going to start with the words, the problem now. The problem now facing one takes the form of a transmuted world so essentially hostile that one has to be, in one's response to it, always fully conscious of the basic apprehensions that make one resolute in resisting, explicit and insistent about them, and, though unsanguine, unmistakably positive in the mode of one's resistance, the resistance one aims at fostering where it can be fostered. A patent manifestation of major change is the immense, monstrous industry of book manufacture. All right, let me think for a second where we're going with this, because the second half of the paragraph takes a big change. Okay. All right, so the first big idea of the paragraph was that the guy making the claim was history itself. The second big idea in the paragraph was the changes in the world were very large. The third major idea is to prove one little detail which proves that the change is very large. So, the change in academic ethos at Cambridge. One way we can see it is this, okay? That's what we're getting to. A patent manifestation of major change is the immense, monstrous industry of book manufacture, addressed to the vast new student populace that has been created irreversibly. It is to be feared in so short a time. Okay, begin with the first words. A patent manifestation of major change. Okay. A manifestation of major change is. Manifestation means something which has come about because of the change. A visible aspect, something you can see. To make manifest means to reveal or make it possible to see something. So, if you say, I can't see any change, students today are the same as students 100 years ago. There has been no change. It's always been this way. Then Levis will say, well, one manifestation of the change is ... A manifestation, for instance, if you have a tree, like a fruit tree, and you say, that is not an apple tree, that is a fig tree. And then in the fall, you pick an apple and you say, a manifestation that this is an apple tree is this apple. You can see that this is an apple tree by its fruit. So one of the fruits of this major change is ... The word patent is another one of those words that means more extreme. A patent manifestation. This means something you cannot deny. Something that makes it obvious. You can't get away from it. So he's saying it is obvious because of this, all right, that there is change, major change. Okay, so a patent manifestation of major change is the immense, monstrous industry of book manufacture. Okay, immense, huge, monstrous industry of book manufacture. Floods of new books. Okay? Addressed to the vast new student populace that has been created. Irreversibly, it is to be feared, in so short a time. Okay, it used to be that only a small minority of the upper class went to college. The large majority of the population either had a trade they were a carpenter or a bricklayer or a sailor or a soldier. They had a trade or a farmer. Basically, they all worked. A very small minority went into academia. And those scholarly people studied ancient books. They studied dusty, old books that were yellow and crumbling. You didn't need many copies of Plato. You didn't need many copies of all the books. They shared, and they did individual study. And it was a small number of titles and a small number of copies of the same book. However, in the middle of the 20th century, an explosion occurred in the number of students going to college. No longer was it the very top of the upper class. Now it was all of the children of the middle class, whether they were intelligent or stupid, whether they were diligent or lazy, whether they were motivated or being pushed by their parents, whether they wanted to be there or didn't, whether they were drinking and partying at night or studying. Everybody was there. Not only that, in order to give them books, they started the printing presses going and published tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of new books that no one had ever heard of. I mean, your Plato's Republic had been written for, thousands of years. But now we have books that are written, published, compiled, edited, and thrown out there that no one's ever heard of. And the students never even read the classics. They read these other things. And I, myself, have three children in college of my own. And so I know something about the way they make a new edition of the textbooks every 2 or 3 years. They'll take an American history textbook where nothing has changed, and they will put out a new edition. And then the students have to all buy the new edition for $100. They can't use a used book. So this began in the 1970s with the monstrous industry of book manufacture to deal with the vast new student population of non-students, people who are not real students. And they're reading books that aren't real books from Levis's perspective. This isn't literature. This isn't, what is it? We don't even know. This isn't literature. So it says, when he says, addressed to the vast new student populace that has been created irreversibly, it is to be feared. That means we cannot get rid of them. He is saying that to have many students is a bad thing, and unfortunately we can't get rid of them. He is afraid it is a permanent change. And it's been created in so short a time. Okay, now here we have that phrase again, so far as English is concerned. That means for English, the condition that he's about to say applies. By far, the greater part of the annual smother of aids to study is the work of authors or compilers, university teachers themselves, who betray their blank ignorance of what the profitable study of literature is like, and their indifference to the real problems that face all literary students. Okay, so we've got this vast, huge student populace, which means a population of students, which has come about in a short time, which means in just a few years we have many, many people studying, and we have every single year millions of books being produced which are landing on the students and smothering them, which means they can't breathe. They're being buried alive in books. Annual, smother, every year. Annual means every year. Smother means they can't breathe. Of aids to study, that is, books that are supposed to teach them how to study. And these books are produced by authors or compilers who are in the university teaching themselves, and who show, when they say betray their blank ignorance, betray usually means something different. Betray is one of those words with many meanings, two meanings. They betray their ignorance. That means they show their ignorance. They reveal their ignorance. Their blank ignorance, meaning they are totally clueless, again, of what the profitable study of literature is like. So the books they're producing are worthless, and you can tell from looking at the book that the author didn't know anything about literature and didn't care. They were indifferent. That means they don't care. Indifferent to the real problems that face all literary students. Time for a break. Any questions, send them in. This has been a long class. We've gone half an hour past what we normally do, I think. So send us some questions if you have any. Hello again. I want to say we have had no questions, and that's fine. I hope you are understanding. If you have any questions or want to talk more about anything, feel free to write during the week in Portuguese or English, and we'll talk about them in the class. And if you write, I was going to say, if you write something to me, I will respond, but I usually don't see the emails until the week, Thursday. So if you want to write something to me at the email address in English, I will respond to you in English. So I'll talk to you later, and hope to hear from you. See you later. Bye-bye.